Hi, everyone. In this video, I want to talk about a very important topic, but very often neglected. The reason we don't really talk about database normalization as much as we should is because this is really an area that belongs to information technology. But now with every user moving into business intelligence, there is a requirement for everybody to have a sense of how normalization works. 5 years back, things were very different. If you were an Excel user, there probably was no need for you to learn what normalization is. But today you can't survive without it. And I've seen that a lot of people and a lot of clients suffer because of lack of knowledge about normalization. They expect that you can bring the table directly from an Excel file without realizing that there is a lot of ETL and normalization that has to be done. Let's take an example. So I have a data set with me here. We have the course code. So CS 101, 152, and 154. We have the course venue, the lecture hall 2021, and the CS auditorium. There are two instructors, Professor George and Professor Atkins. And then, of course, we have the phone number. Now, at first glance, if we think about any issue with the data, it wouldn't seem like it. It seems that the data set is already correct. But think of it this way. What if the phone number is updated for Professor George? To change the phone number, you will have to change it not in one place, but in two places. And that doesn't sound very practical. What if there is a spelling mistake in the name? Then again, you will have to make the change in two places. What if one of the courses is reassigned to a different instructor? Now, I can't simply select column D and do a find and replace, because Professor George will still be teaching CS 154, but 101 is being taught by somebody else. Now, these are the challenges that we face if the data set has been given in one single table without looking at normalization. Now, imagine the same data was in this layout. There are two separate tables. One of them has the instructor detail. So Professor George is ID 1 and Atkins is ID 2. And then in the course table, you will notice that we have only mentioned the instructor ID. Now, this is very helpful because now if I want to change the number, I only have to change it in one place. If the spelling needs to change, it only needs to change in a single place. Also, if any of these courses are being reassigned to a different instructor, I simply have to change the number here and then add that record to the previous table. So I hope that gives you a sense of why it is important to break the data into two parts, into two separate tables. Let's talk about normalization a little more. So broadly, we refer to normalization as the process of organizing data whenever you're working with databases, multiple tables which have relationships with each other. As an Excel user, you might never have created a model, but when you do a VLOOKUP, you essentially are joining two different tables. Now, this includes tables and relationships, as I mentioned, and the rules allow us to protect the data and make the database more flexible. How does it do that? One is that redundancy isn't there. Like in our example, you would have noticed that Professor George is coming 2 times. That doesn't make sense. It should only appear a single time because storage is precious. So that is what it does. It eliminates redundancy and also inconsistent dependency, which basically means that I will only find the data that I'm looking for in a table. I will not find all the data points in a single table. An example would be if you have the customer data, and I have the employee name who has serviced that customer, would I also want to have the date of joining of that employee in the same table? It doesn't make sense. The customer table should only have the customer details, and the employee details should be in an employee table. That is what inconsistent dependency refers to. Now, business problem, to discuss this in a little more detail, typically are redundant data which occupies a lot more space, and space, like I said, is precious. And then obviously it creates maintenance problems as well, because you are not able to have a single source of truth, and it's difficult to have validation and assurance of the quality of data that you have. Data is, of course, inconsistent, which we want to avoid. And then multiple changes are required if you haven't focused on normalization. And then I've already spoken about inconsistent dependencies. Now, there are different forms of normalization. So we call it the first, second, third, fourth, fifth normal form. But typically, the third normal form is considered the highest level for most applications and business requirements. Also, keep in mind that real world scenarios cannot ensure a perfect compliance. What that means is that there might be a business requirement where you have to violate one of the rules of normalization. So don't adhere to it strictly by the book, because it's very academic in nature. Practically, in a business setting, you might want to be a little flexible, bending the rules, but then by and large, you should try to follow the rules as much as possible. But don't be rigid and follow the rule, compromising the way the business processes have been laid out. Obviously, if you're violating any of the rules, make sure that you anticipate any problems that might occur and handle that accordingly. Also, when you do normalization, a lot of clients would say that I have to break my data into a lot of smaller tables, which in its own way creates more complexity. So balancing it is very important. Let's look at an example in more detail. So the first thing I'm looking at is unnormalized data. We have the student ID 10224123. We have the advisor to that student. We have the advisor room, the room where they sit. And then we have the 3 classes being attended each by both the students. Again, at first glance, it seems that the dataset is correct. But if you really think about it, it doesn't make sense to have 3 columns for the classes. For a simple reason, if I ask you how many total classes are there or how many unique classes are there, if I want to change one of these, it's very difficult because the classes haven't been mentioned in a single column. That's what I want. So the first normal form will essentially change this into this. You notice that student 1022 is coming 3 times because there are 3 classes the student is attending. Similarly, for 4123, the student ID is coming 3 times. And then, of course, we have all the 6 classes coming here. How to perform this operation, also I'll be explaining to you. We will see how to do this in Power Query. Let's take a slightly different example. Imagine you have the instructor and the instructor is taking multiple courses. So Professor Atkins is only taking a single course, but Professor George is taking 2 courses. So 101 and 154. Again, this is looking okay, but then I can't have 2 values in a single cell. So I would like to break it into 2 separate records. At the second normalized form, continuing with the previous example, this is a lot better than the previous one, but then this also has its issues here. So if you notice, I have the student and the advisor room, which is fair enough. But then why has the classes been mentioned along with this, right? It doesn't make sense to have the normalized form where the classes dependency is as per the same table. I don't want that to happen. That's why I want to break it into 2 separate tables. So what we're doing here is that we are creating a student table and we are also creating a classes table like this. And then we'll create a relationship between both of these. You notice that this is the one-to-many relationship that I'll be showing how to create. And then finally, you can also see that the student advisor and the name of the advisor and the room number can be further broken down into two different tables. Now, I'm not really going to explain this in a lot of detail. If you are interested, you can just search for normalization of Power BI, and then let me search for data normalization. And I'm not able to find the right link here. So let's search for Microsoft. And there we go. So we have this wonderful official documentation by Microsoft that talks about database normalization. I've taken the examples from here itself. Of course, here it has been explained in much more detail, and it explains to you how the three forms work. So once again, recapping, the unnormalized data is like this. Once we get it in the first normal form, we want to have all the classes in a single column or a single field. In the second normal form, we notice that the class is not functionally dependent on the student. That means the class here is not functionally dependent on the student. And that is why it is not in the second normal form. Hence, we want to break it into two tables. Hence, we notice registration is a separate table, student is a separate table. Also, when we look at the third form, we want to eliminate data not dependent on the key. That means the advisor's office room number is functionally dependent on the advisor attribute. And that's why we want to move it. That means the fact that the advisor room is obviously dependent on the advisor name, we want to make it come inside a single table like this. There are loads of examples available on the internet. If you just search for database normalization, you will find a lot of content available. There are some amazing websites. I will not really tell you where to go, but try to go to at least 10 links so that you understand the topic from different perspectives. Even though fundamentally it's the same thing, when you see different examples, you will understand it better. Now let's look at how do we do this. It's one thing to know the importance, which hopefully all of you agree on. And it's another thing to know academically how we have the different forms with us. But then in practice, how do you do it? So what I want to do here is I will just copy this data into a different sheet. And we first want to give it a name. So I'll insert it as a table. And I just want to call it my table 1. Let's keep it at that. We will go to data and then select from table / range. This will take the table to Power Query, where I'll show you how to get this in a first normal form. It's very simple. I will select the first 3 columns because those are already correct, and right click, and then we want to unpivot all the other columns. And there you go. We have the data set like this. Now, if you notice, this value is essentially the class, and we don't really need the number, so we can remove it. And let me close and load it. And if you notice, this is what we had before, right? We have the student, advisor, room, and the class, which is what we are getting here as well, right? Let's also see how to do this with this one, where we have 2 course codes in the same cell. So I'll just put it here. As we did before, I'll insert it as a table, and we will change it to table 2. Or let's call it table 3. Then we go back to data and then from table / range. And this time, first we want to remove this parentheses, which is there. I don't want that. So what I want to do here is to first go to transform, and then we select extract, and we would like to get text between delimiters. So we want to get all the text between my open and my close parentheses like this. We click on OK, and we get the data like this. Now we want to select the column, right click, and then split column by delimiter. But we don't want it to come in different columns. We want it to come in different rows. So we will split it by a custom delimiter, which is a comma followed by a space. And we want to go to advanced and change it to rows. Once we do that, you notice we get the data like this. Once again, close and load. And you notice we have the data like this, which is exactly how we had it before as well. Let's also look at the second normal form and how to create a relationship between both of these. For this, I want to use Power Pivot. So first I'll take this and we want to give it two table names. So insert table. And I want to call this my advisor table. And this one we want to call as my class table. Let's go to insert. And what we want to do here is to create a pivot table, but making sure that we're also adding it to the data model. One more time, we will insert the second table as a pivot table, but one more time, we want to add it as a data model. And once you have done that, you will notice that in the all option, all the tables have appeared here. So we simply want to select the class in the values and the advisor in the rows. Even though right now it's not working perfectly, we can go to Power Pivot. Then we go to Manage. And here we click on the diagram view and we want to create a relationship between both the tables. So a relationship between student and student. It creates a one-to-many relationship. In fact, let me put it like this. And let me close it. And now you notice it tells me 3 and 3. That means that Professor Jones has 3 classes, Professor Smith has 3 classes. Just to show you that it will work even if I update it. Or let's do it like this. Let us say we have 1022. That means student 1022 has Professor Jones as the advisor. And I'll just put another class here. So let's say 19909. And we come back to the pivot table and we will right click and refresh. You notice it changes to 4 and 3. So that's how, once you have created multiple tables, you will create a relationship between them. So we've covered a lot of topics. And for those of you who come from an IT background, this would be child's play for you. For those of you who, like me, come from a non-IT background, it's quite a lot to digest, but then it's imperative that you understand how these things work. Do keep in mind that don't get too in-depth and too bothered with the technical and the academic know-how. Yes, there is some literature that you have to go through, but then also try to apply it practically to your business problems. Don't keep on reading and reading because there's a lot to read on the internet. If you feel you don't have a need to learn it in so much depth, first identify what are the business problems that you have. From my experience, I think the ability to unpivot, the ability to split it into rows, and the ability to create a relationship. These are the most important things that you have to know. Obviously, what I've shown you here can be done on Power BI as well, because Power Query and Power Pivot work exactly the same way, even on Power BI.